I enjoy watching movies. They are one of the few ways that I'm able to experience some form of emotion in an environment that is safe for me to be vulnerable in. This sees me watching a lot of movies, and since one of my other hobbies is playing video games, I tend to do both at once. This creates way more problems than what is reasonable, as my attention span is split between two tasks. While my coworkers think of me as an alcoholic or as someone who dabbles in substance abuse, I'm known here on YouTube as being a goon maxer who hides his fetishes even worse than Quentin Tarantino. You see, about 4 hours ago while building a house in Terraria and editing another video, I watched the legendary movie known as Fight Club. As a result, this script is made completely from my own recollection of a movie that I watched over the course of 5 hours at 1.25 speed. If that sounds at all interesting, get in your thigh highs and let's get into this unreliable reflection. The film starts by following a seemingly random guy who is faced with the monotony of life and instead of appreciating it for what it is, wishes for it to end. Because I'm about as terrible with names as I am with remembering to grab the clothes out of the dryer to hang them before they wrinkle, we are going to call this guy Hulk, among other adjacent names. In this "you don't want to make me angry" phase of his life, he describes the impossibilities of sleeping to his physician. It's as clear to me as looking through a snow-covered windshield that this pain that he speaks of is perhaps related to racing thoughts, the desire to be doing more, and the feeling that nothing in life is changing. Therefore, he feels stagnant. Society encourages us to pursue the next best thing at all times, and it is hard for this not to radiate to other aspects of your life, and this film highlights how ridiculous the things we do on a daily basis are. The commute to work, the constant need for substance, the constant weight of never being enough. Fight Club connects all these negative attributes of life that most of us feel, even if in some small way, painting the picture that life is in parts miserable for all of us, but especially the green guy. It's at this doctor's appointment that the green giant is faced with the words, "Go touch a man's prostate if you really want to be able to sleep at night." Armed with a doctor's order, he visits the only place where he wouldn't be able to find one, a support group for prostate cancer. This is because he is an insomniac. You see, once chemotherapy doesn't work out, one can choose to have a resection of their prostate. I can't personally attest to the sexual repercussions of prostate cancer, but the men at the meeting really do set a beautiful scene. Banding together against a shared challenge is what humanity is known for. You can see Hulk adapting to being in a safe and vulnerable position, allowing him to finally sleep at night. It's clear that he was missing something in his life. YouTube has been kind of funny because when I first started, I was a full-time college student armed with enough academic scholarships that I didn't need to work. This left me with a surprising amount of time on my hands. Outside of schoolwork, I effectively had no group. When my people, you, found me, I had momentum to keep going. This is what participating in a group allows people to do, build momentum. Being in a group inspires a waterslide effect that allows pushing of limits. To some, they may be left with feelings of exhaustion after said meeting, but in the moment that passion fuels the required energy. I sometimes look at groups like a perpetual motion machine. It seemingly is infinite in what its capacity is, but there is always some repercussion or trick. I would not go to a wedding without people. I would not go to a birthday party without people. I would not go to a funeral without people. While all those may have cake and have been a terrible example for the point I'm attempting to reach, people are what make life worth living. Even the edgiest Terraria player would be nothing without others. No game to play without developers, no computer to play on, and most importantly, no wiki to find out how rare the rod of Discord really is. Comfort is strange, but we find it within each other. Giant breasts help with that, but you can always try to reach the prostate instead. It's then this series of support groups is infiltrated by a She-Hulk. Martha, not to be confused with Batman's or Superman's moms, causes the situation to go upside down. You see, Hulk doesn't have prostate cancer because his cells regenerate fast enough that any cancer cells are immediately destroyed. He also doesn't have an alcohol problem because despite drinking enough to make a standard man's liver explode with cirrhosis daily, alcohol is filtered through his gamma radiation and large genitalia. Essentially, he's a fraud, and Martha, who is somehow familiar with Superman's weakness of kryptonite, is also a fraud. The author's point of the introduction of Martha is to highlight that Hulk knows what he's doing is morally questionable, that visiting multiple support groups without a connection to each group makes him an outsider, but that he wishes to do it regardless and therefore wishes not to be caught. He confronts Martha after days of beef stewing, and they manage to formulate an agreement that allows them to divide up the days in a way that they could both still enjoy their regular pastime. Martha is an important character who shares a lot of similarities with Hulk, specifically their obvious mental health problems, but we'll talk about that in another section. Before we continue, I would like to draw additional attention to how well developed Robert's boobs are thanks to estrogen. That is all. Thank you. After being smothered by a man's chest, Hulk decides that he needs to take some time to himself. In modern-day America, this means going on a plane ride and meeting a soap enthusiast. This is, of course, the only actor that I recognize from this film by name, Brad Pitt. When someone thinks of Fight Club, they typically think of Brad Pitt. Personally, when I think of Fight Club after having consumed the entire mastery, my thoughts continue to go back to Bob's chesticles. Attempting to get my mind out of the gutter, I would like to talk about this initial interaction between these two characters. The Green Goblin, Goblin Bob's chest that is of course struggling with finding purpose in reality. Brad, who I believe his name is Terry in this film, seems very grounded in something. I don't want to say reality because I feel like that gives the wrong take of this particular character, but I believe it's what Hulk believes reality to be, if that makes sense. Essentially, Terry is everything that Hulk wishes he could be, and while the film later confirms that exact sentiment, I'd like to think that I was the first one to ever think that. On this plane ride, Terry gives Hulk his business card, and while he doesn't necessarily encourage him to reach out, it seems like an open invitation. The big green guy keisters said card and goes about his business. After an indeterminate amount of time later, Hulk returns home only to realize that his entire apartment is completely exploded more than the toilet on Thanksgiving Day. This is evident by the copious amounts of corn kernels littered on the walls and the people that I see on my mom's calendars. Once Hulk realizes that he doesn't have a place to go, he attempts to contact Martha. Martha either answers or doesn't, but Brad Pitt does, and after a little bit of ball busting, they walk down one of the nicest streets I've ever seen. Look at the lack of needles littered about. While the initial connection to mental health earlier in the film managed to connect to me on a deep level, it was this walk with these two characters that I found myself truly connecting to the film. I've been struggling with aspects of consumerism and our seemingly human desire to hoard as many material possessions as we can get our hands on. While I like to consider myself relatively organized, I do have a lot of things. Many of them I consider somewhat useful, such as office supplies or tools, but I may have only used them one time. Hell, I might not have used them at all. Brad Pitt nonchalantly suggests that items are completely inconsequential. Like a lot of things, extremes are extremes for a reason. This movie highlights a lot of extremes, but there's a great message behind each aspect. For the past year or so, I've been trying to decrease the number of possessions that I have by donating them to churches or families in need. This has been therapeutic, but this part of the film is not talking about donating things. It's talking about letting them go from your life. Specifically, this act of letting go is to make room for things that are more important. Terry seems to stress that living is the most important part of being. I'm not sure that it is necessarily connection with others that Terry seeks, but simply life experiences. This message is seemingly echoed upon arriving at Terry's house, if you'd even call it that, an obviously abandoned building that has been made functional once again through the act of perseverance. Functional being the key word. To describe it in a way that my Midwestern self would, it looks as if it is a crack house, that is to say that the person living here cares little about present or possibly misguided standards. Not only do they not care about appearances, but it could be inferred, given the likelihood of mold or asbestos given the age of the property, that the inhabitants don't care about their lives either. I'm all about a person living below their means or putting their financial priorities to those outside of vanity, but this place is hardly considered livable by today's standards. I'm not sure what the original intention is behind this setting, but I'm going to use hindsight to suggest that Brad Pitt owns nothing. I would suggest that this is less about his personal character and more about a plot hook used later on, but at the same time it seems to follow his desire to be free, and for his moral possessions to not weigh down on his soul. A part that may have been before or after the previous part was Pitty and Hulk walking out of the bar. Pitty was like, "I'm into guys that hit me, so hit me." And Hulk said, "I'm just a glorified accountant, and my last gay experience was 2 months ago." Mr. Pitt then responded with, "Well, it's not tax season, so I bet my good little boy is looking for work." And so with gamma-infused anger rushing through his body, Hulk slapped Mr. Pitt. This scene's purpose is none other than to make you feel like absolute dog water about modern-day American healthcare. That's why we've decided to move the whole set to Canada to encourage a better plausibility of healthcare affordability and the poor housing market, as is illustrated by John Pitt's house. All terrible comedy aside, this interaction really highlights the start of this film's message, or at least what I took away from it. I would rather feel something and live, rather than feel nothing and not live. Sounds like something a 3-year-old could have written, or a man in his early 20s who is still trying to explore his sexuality, but the desire to actually be present and experience things is what seems to be Fight Club's purpose. Life is really just endless, monotonous tasks with a few sparks of joy littered within. It's within these few moments that we define ourselves. What are your top 3 defining moments? They don't have to be the most impressive parts of your life, but rather something that you can still feel today. Something that has stuck with you. Pause the video and ask yourself, if you had to edit your life down to 3 clips, what would they be? There were a lot of moments in my youth that I sat and played, looking for Legos, playing with sticks and sand at the playground. I don't know if I could pick one specific moment as it all blurs together, but that active isolation, looking for something that isn't there, being so totally enveloped, is something that defines me even currently as I write this. I'm looking for my next word, on the hunt for just the perfect piece that makes me feel complete. There was a moment in high school that a teacher gave us an assignment, specifically some PowerPoints on a time in history, and she had stated that there would be no rubric. To make matters even more complicated, there were 11 people in my class and the assignment had to be done in a group of 2. Therefore, I would have to do the work of 2 people, given that I was the odd man out. To have no guidance was atypical. To be forced to do twice as much sent me over the edge. I can remember saying, "It's not fair." It just fell out of me like water from Niagara Falls, but my jaw clamped shut afterwards. It was the first time that I really spoke my mind about something so matter-of-factly. The teacher, who was one of my favorites, handled it with tact, from what I remember, easing all the problems that I had in the moment. But this was the first time that I finally realized that life wasn't going to be fair. Sometime after graduation, I had a little free time on my hands, so I decided to put together a hiking pack with some food stuff and walk to the nearest town. One way, it was 12 miles, nothing that I hadn't done before, but the conditions were oddly brutal. It was walking across the thick stones found alongside the railroad tracks in a rather chilly temperature. I had packed well, my jackets were so thick that they made me twice the size I typically was. But somewhere along the way, about 3/4 the way if I remember right, I started feeling a gnawing feeling that this wasn't a good idea. I was hit with a wave of fatigue and the cold just seemed to rip right through my clothing. But I persisted. I kept walking, my boots providing just enough support to my ankles to keep them from buckling. I got to my destination, huddled in the old chimney of a park. My hands frozen with the juices of an apple and the crackers and peanut butter drying out my mouth past my chapped lips. Then I had to walk back home. Self-inflicted though these events in my life may be, these were the first ones to come into mind. Sure, seeing my house destroyed, my brother leaving for the military, giving whole school speeches, or my reoccurring anxiety of seemingly minor degrees of opposition may have some bar on who I am, but these feel like moments that I've lived. I was defined. This section of the film was also where Fight Club was fully defined. The movie proceeds to utilize a series of jump cuts that do well to illustrate the passage of time. Slowly, more and more men join this club, rules are made, and a great deal of momentum is shown. Again, people are momentum. The group had been meeting in what was apparently the basement of a bar. Dim lighting and stone fill the space. A fantastic detail that is added later on in the film is the smell of blood and sweat lingering into the following day, grounding it to a greater degree. As excitement builds for the group and more members are added, a few key details are filled in with these people's lives. Band-aids and gauze can be seen covering lacerations. Excuses are given to medical professionals, and it seems like society just accepts this as a new normal. Men continue to meet until their first opposition is met. The basement that they've been meeting in is actually owned by Mr. Stiletto, a freak in the sheets. This is a key piece of context that you'll do well to remember for the next minute or so. He walks down the steps with his bodyguard to confront the men for trespassing. Words are exchanged and eventually Mr. Stiletto throws a punch when Pity McGee doesn't take the hint. With laughter passing the stone wall shortly afterwards, he continues to wail on him with blood dripping from his face. It's in the blink of an eye that Brad is on top of Mr. Stiletto, his juices flowing into all of his orifices. The bodyguard is currently looking up how to bodyguard for dummies, but is only finding WikiHow pages on how to fix a failing marriage. He finds it interesting despite not being in a relationship. It is in this display of domination that Mr. Stiletto converts back to subism, where he states that the club can continue using the basement as long as he is allowed to oil them all up in between fights. They welcome him into the Fight Club as a professional oiler. With their greatest adversity faced so far, their success skyrockets. The Hulk punches himself into a blackmail-like situation with his boss, allowing him to essentially get paid to do nothing. Fight Club has now reached a level that multiple groups are forming from the original intent, meaning that the growth is seemingly presented in a way that is exponential. Martha, Martha, Martha. Throughout the growth of the club and earlier on in the film, Brad Pitt interrupted a phone call between Hulk and Martha, resulting in Pitt and Martha getting together. I'm not sure how or why this happened, but multiple times it felt like Hulk was in Gamora the way that the background sound would be near constant moaning. I'm not saying that I'd be interested in being sandwiched between them, but I am thinking about it. This relationship pushes a little bit of tension between the once friendly two dudes, but overall it's just like having a roommate that doesn't have any sense of boundaries. Pitt doesn't seem to be attracted to her in a romantic sense, and there is some aggression between Hulk and Martha, like he cares about her but isn't afforded the words, but the relationship just kind of seems like it is built upon an unsteady foundation. Maybe they should both attend a support group. Speaking about a breaking point, the group starts to do various assignments that involves terrorizing the city, leaving Hulk upset. He knows how much damage he has caused in the past from his violent outbursts and doesn't feel like that was what Fight Club should be a part of. Pitt starts completely leaving Hulk out of the equation and starts engaging in threatening politicians. This spirals out of control, and having a disagreement sees Hulk reconfirming faith for the initiative by getting into a needless car accident. Again, I would love to see their medical bills and insurance, because if you willingly get into an accident, you must be suffering from an inguinal hernia with how massive your balls are. Ladies, you could be suffering from having a breast implant explode. I'm all about gender equality. This car accident sees Hulk resting up, seemingly no longer infused with gamma radiation. He will henceforth be known as Bruce, and his name will be shouted for all to hear as if it were a banner in the sky. Bruce realizes several things have changed since his car accident coma. Notable is the sheer number of people at the house and the efficiency of their work. With militant actions being performed by only the most attractive members, things have gotten out of hand. So Bruce went off to go find Brad, only to realize that he must have left. He tells Martha that Brad isn't at the house, and she seems completely mystified and devastated, though I now realize that she can't possibly be both at the same time. It certainly appeared that way. Bruce then goes on a frantic mission to find Brad so that Martha can reach satisfaction. He travels all over the world, like France, America, and other places that shall not be named because my geography is awful. I am aware that Wood Buffalo National Park is the largest national park in Canada, so that's cool. Bruce ultimately finds multiple points of Fight Club in various bars and restaurants. It is clear that the spread of this group could possibly be correlated to the pandemic that took the world by storm in 2020, but causation does not appear to have a link at this time. Sleep deprived and in need of room service, Bruce makes a stop at Santa Monica's luxury bar and hotel, which is where he finds Pitt. The only problem being that Pitt informs him that he is him. To clarify, the film jumps back to multiple points where Bruce was actually where Pitt was. This stroke of genius genuinely made my jaw drop, and this was the single best reveal of mental illness that I believe I have ever seen. The shocking realization of it all fills in a lot of gaps, but leaves the viewer thinking and wanting more. This gentle tease transforms into one of those massages where a woman steps on you when Bruce, who we will now call Terry because I believe the character's name started with a T, steps inside of a police station to provide information relating to a Fight Club plan to mash financial collapse. This goes poorly because men want to cut off his balls. This is the greatest part in the film because I felt my balls retract in a defensive fashion. Terry then escapes and tracks down Martha. I'm now realizing that this happens before he visits the police station, but I'm far too committed to the last 100 words or so. Meeting in the neutral environment that is a diner, Terry and Martha sit down to have a conversation. She thinks it's possibly an apology or some sort of goodbye, but honestly it's somewhere in between. Terry apologizes for shutting her out and acting incredibly weird, almost as if he were two separate people, because for half the film he was. Instead of Brad Pitt or Hulk, there was only one person the entire time, meaning that Martha was still absolutely getting destroyed and kept coming back for more. At this point, Terry was trying to do damage control. He realized how many awful things he'd done as Pitt and wanted to make those mistakes go away. He realized that he had hurt Martha and wanted her to be protected from the fallout. He demands that she run away, and there are some emotions raised, but ultimately she boards a bus when Terry throws money at the problem. Money really can buy happiness. Love is a little bit of an overused word for the context that it is generally inferred, but it is also underutilized. It's hard getting the actual thoughts of these characters without being able to listen to them as if it were a book, but it really seems as if these characters seem to love one another. Martha is obviously hesitant to choose something definitive, but Terry fully believes that getting her away from him is the best solution. That deep degree of care of wanting someone to be safe but telling them to get away because you know you aren't good for them is the greatest degree of love. After meeting with Martha and turning himself in, Terry finds himself on the run. He decides if the police won't help him, he'll track down the attack himself. He breaks in and finds the explosives that are supposed to bring about the dramatic downfall of one of the many important financial institutions, but not before Pitt shows up to knock some sense into him. Despite not being aware of Pitt being himself, they duke it out in the parking lot. I absolutely love this fight as the constant switches to the security footage show just how amazing this situation was. Terry was fighting with his inner demons, and after a Wick-like fighting sequence, he manages to talk some sense into himself and disarm the bomb. But shortly afterwards, he knocks himself out and ties himself up. I'm all for trying a little bit of bondage, but I feel like I'd be devastated if I had to call my roommate in to help untie me after some self-inflicted restriction play. In this case, fortunately, Terry realizes how much control he has over the situation and unties himself, presenting himself another problem. Terry is Pitt and Pitt is Terry. Terry realizes that he can't shoot Pitt, so he realizes that he needs to send himself a different kind of message. Messages are some of the strangest yet most utilized forms of communication. Messages in the context that I'm referring to can be body language, verbal, writing, or any combination of the three and more. They are so fickle with how they are received. I can learn something one time and remember it for the rest of my life, or I can learn something 10 times and still be shocked at how new it is. The point of this discussion of messages is really about that final scene. He needs to get a message to himself when he isn't listening. Therefore, the choice of the most direct, physical message seems perfect for the plot. I should note that I'm not encouraging a self-inflicted injury or death, merely reflecting on its power as a message. A martyr is far more common than we truly apply. After all, the New Testament refers to Jesus as a martyr, and Christianity is the most practiced religion, though I don't practice myself. Regardless, with an additional 2 holes that I'm sure may provide an interesting sensation, Terry survives, if you'd call it that, and his men bring up Martha to witness the final scene of the film. I hope you enjoyed this video and it made you laugh, question your life choices, and reflect upon who you are as an individual. The purpose of this wasn't to provide an analysis for Fight Club, but rather think more about it. I think it was a fantastic film, and while it can be interpreted in many different ways, it was nice to just think. The original inspiration behind this video was that the moment that I finished this film, I went to Google to search up the meaning of Fight Club. Before I pressed enter, I thought for a few seconds. The seconds turned to minutes, and I realized that this amazing access to technology has really made me stop thinking as critically as what I once had. In English class, the teacher would ask, what did the author mean when personifying the drapes? And I genuinely missed doing that. I missed writing and exploring my thoughts in that way. Again, I hope that this connects with you in some capacity, but do me a favor regardless. Have a good one.